You know, you hear the word populism thrown around all the time these days, but what does it actually mean? Especially when we're talking about Central and Eastern Europe, a place with such a unique political history, totally transformed after the fall of communism. Okay, let's really get into it and figure out what's going on behind the headlines.
So let's start with the big question, right? What is populism? Think about it. After 1989, this whole new political world opens up. A ton of optimism, for sure, but also some real hardship. And out of that tension, a backlash against the new folks in charge was pretty much guaranteed. But the real question is, what kind of backlash was it going to be? That's the puzzle we're going to piece together today.
This quote, man, it just nails the core tension, doesn't it? On one hand, you've got the rules, the institutions, the form of government. And on the other, you've got this raw, emotional public energy, the steam bath of popular feelings. Populism, it lives right in that gap. It's the voice that claims to speak for the people against an elite that just doesn't get it. And in post-communist Europe, this wasn't just one simple reaction. That backlash against the new, smart, technocratic elites who were changing everything, well, it split into two completely different paths. It wasn't one big movement, but two separate phenomena that, honestly, we often mix up. And that brings us right to the heart of this whole thing, the idea that there isn't just one kind of populism in the region. There are two. We're talking about radical populism versus centrist populism, two totally different playbooks. This slide lays it out perfectly. The easiest way to think about it is this. Radical populism wants to tear the whole house down. It's mad at the entire liberal, globalized system. It has what you call a thick ideology, all mixed up with nationalism and authoritarian ideas to protect the nation. Centrist populism, though, it just wants to fire the managers. It's not mad at the system, it's mad at the corrupt, incompetent people running it. Its message is simple. Let's clean house. Its ideology is thin. It's not about big, grand ideas. It's about being practical and getting the job done. So that term thin ideology, it's really important. It's a strategy, a tactic. When people aren't loyal to one party anymore and everything feels up in the air, a clever political entrepreneur can use this approach to tell a really simple story. It's us, the good people, against them, the corrupt elites. It just cuts through all the complicated policy noise and gets straight to the point with a simple moral message. And that's exactly what makes centrist populism so effective. Okay, so we've got the theory down, but how did these two types of populism actually play out over the years? The history here tells a really fascinating story about how they grew and changed. So if you look at the early 90s, you see these radical populist parties pop up, but most of them just fizzled out. Then, fast forward to the 2000s, people are getting tired of all the tough changes, this transition fatigue, and bam, a whole new wave of both types hits the scene. You get radical parties like Jobbik in Hungary, but you also see huge wins for centrist populists, like the party in Bulgaria started by their former king. And then we get to the 2010s, and this is where the game really changes. Mainstream parties, big ones like Fidesz in Hungary and Law and Justice in Poland, they start using the populist playbook themselves and they turn it up to 11. So we have the theory and we have the history, but is there any hard data to prove that these two types of populism are really that different? Well, let's see what the expert surveys have to say. This chart really says it all. See that vertical axis? It goes from authoritarian and nationalist down at the bottom, all the way up to green and libertarian at the top. Now look where the R's are. The radical populists, they're all huddled down there in that bottom corner. But the C's, the centrist populists, they're much more spread out and way more moderate. The data draws a super clear line right between them. They're two totally different camps. And guess what? We see the exact same split when you ask about the European Union. On this chart, the vertical axis shows where a party stands on the EU. And again, look at that pattern. The radical R parties are almost all fiercely anti-EU, clustered way down at the bottom. The centrist C parties, pretty much all pro-EU. This isn't just a small disagreement, it's a fundamental difference in how they see their country's future. It just confirms these are two very different political animals. Okay, so they're ideologically different, we've established that. But does that actually translate into winning elections? Is there really this rising tide of populism that we hear so much about? Well, the data here paints a much more complicated picture. The truth is, in most elections, in most of these countries, non-populist parties still got the majority of the votes. And look at how different it is from place to place. In a country like Slovenia, populism has barely made a dent. But in Hungary, it's completely taken over the system. So the crucial point here is there has been no single uniform populist wave. The reality on the ground is way more fragmented. This brings us to the final and, maybe the most important question of all. What do we make of populism? Is it a destructive threat to democracy, or could it, sometimes, actually be a useful tool?
All right, let's get right to it. When you boil it all down, is populism the enemy of liberal democracy? The case for it being a threat is definitely a strong one. And the biggest danger might not even be the fringe parties themselves. It's when huge mainstream parties like Fidesz and PIS take on these radical ideas and make them seem normal. That's when populism can become a real vehicle for anti-democratic movements that start questioning the legitimacy of courts, the media, the whole system.
But that's not the whole story. The centrist side of populism looks completely different. It can actually be a pretty harmless way to clear out a corrupt political class that's been around for too long. It's often just a reaction to real problems, like corruption, that people have every right to be angry about. So the key thing to remember is that not every single populist is out to destroy democracy. So if you take one thing away from this, it should be this. Populism is not a monolith. It's not one single thing. In post-communist Europe, it has shown two completely different faces. One is radical, ideological, and wants to tear down the system. The other is centrist, pragmatic, and just wants to fix it. And understanding that difference, well, that's the whole key to understanding the politics of the region. And that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. Is this constant tension between the people and the elites a bug in the system, a flaw that we need to fix? Or is it actually a feature, an unavoidable part of how democracy is supposed to work, always challenging and correcting itself? Something to think about.